Cemeteries are often the first place to look when delving into the history of the area. The members of the Kelowna District Genealogical Society invested countless hours of volunteer time and effort to document the hundreds of burials in various Central Okanagan cemeteries and isolated sites. They produced 15 books that document the biographical, genealogical, and historical information of the people who settled in the Central Okanagan. Susan Campbell did much of the researching and writing of the books about local cemeteries and history. Bob Hayes was born in Kelowna, descendant of 2 pioneer families, and is a retired elementary school teacher, local historian, and writer. Bob did much of the researching and writing of these cemetery and local history books. Caroline Robertson is a retired school teacher and talented photographer. She contributed many of the photographs, including cover photographs for these cemetery and local history books.
We're with the Kelowna and District Genealogical Society, and genealogists are very interested in family history. So we look for information about our ancestors. And how do we find it? First of all, we need to know their name and a little bit about them. Where were they born? When were they born? Where did they die? And when did they die? Now, genealogy societies traditionally, as a public service, have gone to cemeteries, typed up the information that's on the headstones, and published it in some form, and made it available to other genealogists. And that's what we've done here. The KDGS, the Kelowna District Genealogical Society, did that in the 80s and 90s. And it becomes outdated quite quickly, as you can understand, because people keep dying. So we have more names that we need to look for. And in 2008, we formed a new committee, and I agreed to take it on, thinking it would be very easy to go on a field trip to a cemetery, write the names down, and then, I guess you have to write it and type it, and then we're there anyway, we may as well take photographs. So the photographs have been taken, they have been online for several years now, so people, wherever they are researching in the world, can look at them. And if they have ancestors or distant relatives that left the old country and came somewhere to Canada or North America, they might find them. So that's the service that we provide. So in the 1980s, they did it. We updated starting in 2008. We're doing from Peachland to Oyama, but not the big Kelowna Cemetery. It's well documented. Not Lakeview Memorial Gardens. It's well documented. So that's where we started. Excuse me, that's where we started. This little display here is sort of an outline of what we did. And that it's self-explanatory. We went to the graves, we took the photographs, we typed, that sort of thing. This was the first series that we did, and it is transcription books. We wanted to make them very self-explanatory so that somebody could have the book, take it to the cemetery, walk to the grave, and find what they were looking for. So to do that, you need a map, and we were very, very lucky that we were able to work with Okanagan College, and the students at one of the classes did this as a project. We were very lucky to have Gil Green. He assigned the job to them, and so it was a real-life application, and it was good for them, it was good for us. So it worked very well. Now, there are representative photographs, yes. Now in the back is where you first go in a book, because that's where the index is. And that's where you find the names in alphabetical order. It also shows where they are in that cemetery, the section, the plot, and so you can go to the other section of the cemetery book here and do it in the order, in the section A, B, C, plot number, and you can find them and find the description of what it says on the actual stone. That's what these books are. Okay, anything else we need to say? Oh, yes, the history. How can we forget the history? Bob wrote the history. Yeah, he wrote a small history of each cemetery as well. And that is included in every book. Now, the Old Winfield book was slightly different. Bob is a director at the Lake Country Museum and Archives. He loved Old Winfield Cemetery. It's a pioneer cemetery, and he had learned about all the people that were buried there. And nobody had written it all up. So this was an opportunity. So it's got biographies and other information that you wouldn't normally find. Yeah. All right, so that's the series 1. We actually thought we had one more book to do, which would be the small cemeteries and the isolated burials. There's only a few isolated burials that we knew about, and the 5 small cemeteries are very small. There's very few people in them. So we didn't think it would be a very big book. It turned into 6 books, and they're big. And particularly the isolated burials. This is a few burials. But what it is we've taken the isolated burials, said, who is this person? How did they live here? Where did they come from? What's their family like? So that's where the genealogy comes in, but it's all tied into local history. So that's what's in these books. And if you take them all from the first one, alphabetical order, I guess, Bob, Duck Lake Cemetery. That is a First Nations cemetery. It's associated with Okanagan Indian Reserve number 7. It's right north of Duck Lake, and nobody's written about this. We were very lucky to contact Shirley Lewis, who is a First Nation person that has researched her family. She's associated with the MacDougall family and Simpsons and Steeles and what's the other name? Bailey. And there's lots of information that we would not have had access to if we hadn't been able to talk to Shirley, and the photographs she gave us. So this is documenting a group of people that haven't been noticed before. That one was the first one. What's the next one? Glen Rosa. All right, Glen Rosa was settled in the early 1900s. It's up the hill from West Bank. If you think of that era, it would not have been easy to travel as much. It was a little bit isolated. And the burials in the Glen Rosa Cemetery are mostly babies and children. The adults seem to get buried in Peachland Cemetery. And so who are these babies? We took the name, we found out who the family was. There was limited information, and we contacted, there were some descendants around that we were able to contact and got pictures from. And it's documented the people that were in this area that actually had babies or children that died, which is a very sad story, but it's enabled us to tell their story. the Hardy family, they arrived in the Kelowna area in about 1900. They have a designated family cemetery within Kelowna District, or the Kelowna, Big Kelowna Memorial Cemetery. It's just Hardy family. So this is about the Hardys. Yeah. Hey? No, that's the one in Glen Rosa. Oh, there's also an animal, I'm guessing. Yes, there were family cemeteries sometimes, you know how families are, sometimes they don't always quite agree on things. So some members of the family might do something that somebody else doesn't quite appreciate, so we've been told some of the stories, but we haven't published. Isolated burials, I think we've mentioned before. Mission of the Immaculate Conception. Now this is the one associated with the Father Pandozzi mission. So it's early. Father Pandozzi is there, and Father, how do you say the last name? Genre. He says it with such a nice French accent. And early the First Nations, of course, and some of the early pioneers are in that cemetery. And this is about that. We describe too the dig that James Baker conducted to find the burial, or actually find the cemetery, because it had been lost. And that's a big part of our history. So that's what that one's about. Oh, Father Pendozi? Oh, the dig. People gave us a lot of pictures that had been taken at the time of the dig. We only printed the sanitized one, and we didn't think people would want to see everything that we had. And Postols. Postols were a very interesting family to research. They bought land at the south end of Duck Lake they arrived in 1872. The father never made it there. He died on the way getting here. But the family took over, and they did an amazing job. Alfred Postol was a son. He was, 18 or so when they arrived. And he was very creative and really encouraged the local agricultural community. He had the first telephone on his property. He did it to Tom Wood, and was it just between the two of them? Yeah. They created, and when was this? About 18 something or other, the first telephone. And so there's very innovative people that have been in the valley. And that's what we found out, and Bob's going to tell you about some of their stories.
Thank you, Susan. I would like to acknowledge, these are uncomfortable, Susan's leadership. She has taken on this project 9 years ago, and it has been a huge project. And Susan, you've done a superb job of leading us through this whole project. And Carolyn Robertson, over there at the edge, Carolyn is a superb photographer. The covers on our books, these are Carolyn photographs. I defy you to find better photographs anywhere. My personal favorite, I have to say, I think this is just absolutely spectacular. That's Duck Lake, and that's just north of the airport. So as Susan said, it is two series of books. This is the process that we went through, and again, Susan guided us very carefully. And the books are available. We did bring some extras. Also have price lists here if you want them. And I'm also being shamelessly commercialized. I brought my own card. I do cemetery tours in Kelowna. So if you ever want to come up and have a cemetery tour in the Kelowna Memorial Park Cemetery, I'd be pleased to see you. So what I thought I would do is highlight 3 of the books. I know some of the people like Karen and Hartley have a full set. We had a very nice afternoon a few months ago with Karen and Hartley, and they purchased a set. But recognize a lot of people would be more, and let's say you are a Galilee, and I can say it's pronounced Galilee because I taught members of the family, not the original Galilee, so I'm not that old. But unless you're a member of some of these families, some of these books are probably of limited interest, but you never know. The 3 that I think are of most interest are, well, I'll start with this one. This is the Mission of the Immaculate Conception. I think, where's that? We know it as Father Pendozi Mission. And, I mean, Randy, you're involved in the Historical Society. Dave, you're involved in the Historical Society. Karen, you're involved. I must admit, one of my pet peeves is that it's called the Pendozi Mission. It really does bother me that it's called the Father Pendozi Mission, because it's not. There is no such place as the Father Pendozi Mission. It is a figment of our imagination. It is the Mission of the Immaculate Conception. If you've been up to Kelowna, you've been to the mission site. I cannot bring myself to call it the Father Pendozi Mission. I'll sort of go, the Father Pendozi Mission. And people go, why are you doing that? Because it doesn't exist. So the Mission of the Immaculate Conception, Pendozi Mission, is a cemetery that really also does not exist in a way. It is across from the mission site off Benvolan Road. You access it actually off Gordon. And it is where Father Pendozi, and as Susan mentioned, Father Gendre, and a number of local pioneers, First Nations and non-First Nations, are buried. It is the oldest burial ground identified in the Okanagan Valley. The first burial being 1860. The mission was established in 1860. This little chapel was built on the mission site a number of years ago to commemorate the Oblates. That's Father Pandozzi, Father Richard, Brother Sorrell, and their, I like this word, you don't care for it, but their entourage that arrived in the Okanagan in 1859 and established the mission. And this is the little cemetery where Father Pandozzi is buried. And as Susan indicated, we originally were going to do one, we thought it'd be a small book on all of these. And then we realized, no, there's way too much. And we also realized this is probably only going to be done once. We're not planning on redoing it, are we, Susan? Carolyn, do you have any desire to leap up and do it again? These are uncomfortable. Anyway, so what I thought I would do is read a little bit and show you these 3 books, because they're probably the ones you might be the most interested in. That's not to say the others aren't of interest. But these ones, I must admit, when I have company and I want to give them a gift, these are the ones I tend to choose, because they're sort of standalones. You don't have to be a member of a certain family. So, one of the things we found with this book is we were able to access, and with all of the books, while Carolyn produced some phenomenal photographs, contemporary ones, there are a lot of old photographs that are moldering away and waiting to be used. And we're from Kelowna, and there's the standard pictures you see in Kelowna of all the little girls holding hands across Main Street. Tired of that picture. The 1,700 Casorso children piled on that poor animal, weighing it down. There's Berards and Brents and everything else in that picture. I believe, I'm not sure there's any Brents hardly in that one. But what we did is we tried to find photographs that you don't see normally. We succeeded. People were so generous about loaning us photographs for this project. For instance, look at those First Nations photographs. Karen's nodding her head. They are, I was in the Kelowna Archives the other day and talking to Tara, the archivist, Tara Hurley. Kelowna Archives has just a few local First Nations photographs. These are local. These were taken along the west side, above, probably around Bear Creek, up towards Naid. They were taken pre-1910 probably, around that era. And they're stellar. We don't know who they are, but it's obvious these pictures belong here. The First Nations were here to begin with. So these are pictures you will not see anywhere else. Eleanor Gein very graciously loaned us the album, and we were able to copy them. The interesting thing is most of them were just little guys, little teeny tiny photographs. Well, you know what usually happens when you blow up a photograph? It goes all grainy. Not these guys. We could have made them larger. They're so good. So we included those. And I wish we had names, but you will not, as I say, find any better First Nations photographs than those ones. What else did we include in here? We included about the Oblates. There's another First Nations photograph. We included in this book, this is a general history. This is a letter that Father Pandozzi wrote to, in October of 1859 to the Bishop d'Albomey, when the Oblates first arrived here at the south end of the lake. The original's in French. The original was written by Father Pandozzi, so it's French, so it's difficult to read. Father Pandozzi had the most hideous handwriting. He obviously did not take the MacLean method of handwriting. His writing was worse than mine. Anyways, we've included things like that. It says, Reverend Father, this is Father Pandozzi. We arrived tonight at a place where we've chosen for our mission. It is a great valley situated in the left bank of the great Lake Okanagan, and rather near the middle of the lake. Well, actually, they were a little further inland. I shall not attempt to make you understand the reason why we have adopted this place in preference to any other. L'Anse au Sable is the largest valley of all the surrounding country. All who know it praise it. The cultivable land is immense, and I myself believe if Father Blanchet is able to send us next year some vine cuttings, we shall be able to start a plantation and the wine industry. For when Brother Sorrell arrives, if he accepts my plan, we shall elevate our little demesne in the middle of the plain against a little hill, well exposed, and we shall be able to sing. Already we have a white family near us, and it is probable that others will present themselves before winter, or at least at the beginning of the season. So we've included that. That's probably one of the first letters ever sent from the Okanagan. The family that they were living next to at the south end of Duck Lake were the Parsons. That enigmatic, we don't know much about the Parsons. Do you know much about them, Randy? They flit in and they flit out, don't they? And the parsons were very important. So we included a little reference there. One of the things that we've also included in this book is a lot of documents. And this was Susan's idea. She said, you know, we've got these documents. For instance, these are our transcriptions, obviously. We've got the 1874 British Columbia Directory. Now, that is a very narrow focus. It's not going to have First Nations people. It's not going to have very many women listed. It's going to be mainly business-oriented or ranchers, males. For instance, 1874, you have A.L. Fortune, August Gillard, Greenhow up in the North Okanagan, Lequem, O'Keefe, Smithson, Tronson, Lamley. We have, this is a document I happened upon quite accidentally. It's the 1879 assessment roll. And it lists people, let's take someone from here. Let's take the only woman listed here. There's only one woman listed here. Her name is Margaret Denis. We started out with this much, didn't we? And we ended up with about 10 pages about Margaret Denis. Her husband was Pierre Denis. Margaret Denis was a farmer. She had 66 acres in 1879. The value of her property is $300. Her personal property was $3,000. She had no cattle, sheep, hogs, or horses. So we've included that in the book. And it's a nice standalone history book. You know, you don't have to have any particular connection here. And it has a wonderful index. Susan did all the indexing. And the index is here. So whereabouts is it? There it is. So for instance, let's take a name like, let's take Lindley. There's Henry Lindley, Margaret Lindley, William Lindley, Louis Lindley, George Lindley, Thomas Lindley, John Lindley, and Sarah Lindley. That, by the way, is the same family as the current chief of the First Nations, Roxanne Lindley. They originally, probably great-great-grandfather, Henry Lindley, actually lived in the Ellison area in 1862. This is the most definitive collection of pioneers in the Central Okanagan you will find anywhere. Susan constructed this page. You'll find some of these images in various archives, but there's the well-known picture of all the old-timers, and there's Joe Christian, and there's Eli Lequem, and there's Auguste Gillard, there's the Lefebvre family, and all the old-timers. The Bernard Lequem, Aminad, his sister, Gaston Lequem of Kelowna. We're getting into there's Francois Ortolan. That's your connection, isn't it, Karen? And we've got the Postols here. This is Postol. And so lots of old photographs. More Postols. We had wonderful success with the Postol family. Susan managed to track down some people. I talked to one of them last night, and they've contributed. There's my great-grandparents, the Whelans. And there's my great-grandfather's sister, Mrs. Wood, and Thomas Wood. So you won't find many more inclusive, I'll pass that around, collection of old photographs. We can pass it around if people want to have a look. Now, what I thought I would do is a bit of reading. This is the Postol Family Cemetery. If you know where Lakeview Memorial Park is on the highway, if you're going north of the airport, and you're almost to Duck Lake. On the left-hand side is Lakeview Memorial Garden Cemetery, is that what they call it now? That big cemetery. If you stand up at that cemetery and look across the road into Ellison, and you see this little knoll with this white fence on it, that is the Postol Family Cemetery. As Susan indicated, the Postols came here in 1872. Mr. Postol didn't live to see the property. He died at what's now Vernon, and he is buried there. One of the earliest burials in the Central Okanagan. And there are still Postol members being buried there. And so this was going to be just a few pages, but it ended up being a lot more than a few pages. So, here's some pictures of what the Postol Ranch looked like. Not everybody did as well as the Postols, but they did very well. They were certainly land barons of that era. And we have C.W. Holliday, who wrote Valley of Youth. He says, in 1890, traveling up and down the valley, They were fine people, those ranchers, always with a welcome for both friends or strangers. Thomas Wood, Bill and Alf Postol, George Whelan, famous for his potent brew of cider, for he already had a bearing orchard. Joe Christian and others that I did not know so well. They are all gone now. So we've listed these people in this book. We've included, and in the other book, photographs of them. Alfred Postol, as Susan mentioned, was a giant in agriculture. He was the one that got the idea of cooperative marketing going. Up till then, everybody else was marketing their crops on their own. This guy was a giant. And he died quite young. He's buried locally. He died in 1897. And this is from the Vernon News. We included a lot of newspaper references. Alfred Postol is dead. How's that grab you? On Sunday, about midday, the summons arrived which called to the unseen world a man whose name has for years been inseparably connected with the development of his portion of British Columbia, and who will be missed as few others in this district would be. Words cannot express the shock which came to many when they first heard that a man so well known, so highly esteemed, and so generally respected had suddenly expired. He had health issues. He had a brother who died young, and he had gone off, hadn't he, Susan, to maybe get some medical attention, and came back and was gone within a few weeks. Didn't live very long. The first intimation that most of our citizens received of the sad event was the announcement made from the pulpit of the Presbyterian Church on Sunday evening that his funeral would take place on Tuesday afternoon. The word had been received by Mr. Wilson just before the commencement of the service that Mr. Postol had died that day about noon, and in referring to the subject, the preacher spoke in a very affecting manner on the noble qualities of character shown during a residence of a quarter of a century in this valley. That's how this starts. That's his obituary. Now, when I die, I'm planning on having a special edition made up. I want whole coverage, first page and everything. But there's an early picture of the grave. And there are still people being buried there. And Susan was able to round up pictures of all of the people. The great index here. All of the people. Find that. All of them buried there. And again, the Postol name is such a well-known one that researching it, you come across other families. And it also has the documents in the back, the assessment rolls. It has a very nice map. Susan's big on maps and indexes. And it's, again, a nice standalone book. And I must admit, I always sort of thought, oh yeah, Postols, they were neighbors of my great-grandparents, so what? After working on this project with Carolyn and Susan and others, came to realize they really were giants. Alfred Postol, I mean, he was, I think, in his 40s when he died. If he'd lived to a good age, when transportation system had changed since 1897, he died, can you imagine what he would have been doing if he was alive, say, the First World War, when the industry was really going? He would have just had everybody going, wow. So that's the Postol book. Now, I do not have children. I've never had children, probably just as well. I did teach for a long time, and I must admit there were students that I sort of had as favorites. You know, the ones that don't kick you or spit at you or something. You tend to like those ones a little more. Of the books we've worked on, this is my favorite. I think the concept is, and again, this was all to be one book. A small book, wasn't it? And it's just too much here. This is about people who are not buried in cemeteries or churchyards. They're buried somewhere else. It could be they're buried on their property. It could be they're buried on a place like the Commonage up near Vernon. It could be like Reverend Stocks buried out in the property out in the west side. They could be like Rembler Paul and his wife buried in their family tomb. Or this one here, which, Carolyn, I think you were the one that discovered this grave, weren't you? That's the one along West Side Road. This little simple marker. It's a new one. There's a little white marker there. That's a grave out on the West Side Road. Not on the road, but beside it. So this, I'm going to do some readings from here. This is if you're all right, if it's okay. So, this is isolated burials. keep in mind that, these are people who are not buried in cemeteries. There's a little introduction talking about First Nations burials, because we have to acknowledge there's obviously hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of First Nation burials that we'll never know about. Sometimes people say, where did you learn about these burials? Well, people like Carolyn, who's a hiker, she provided information. Susan and I would be talking to somebody and say, what about so-and-so? Somebody might have been out hiking and they go, I found an old grave. Then there's other ones. This was quite a weird one. We were just in the middle of finishing. We were almost finished our project. And the Vernon Genealogical Society contacted us and said, we have something you might be interested in. Somebody in Wales was researching an ancestor. His name was John Williams. And he died on May 3rd, 1877. The grave marker, which is here, is in Wales. It actually refers to this John W. Williams of Okanagan, spelled differently because apparently Welsh doesn't have a K or something. It's missing a couple of letters. It refers to this John Williams as dying in the Okanagan, May 3rd, 1877. Well, of course, that got us researching. Sure enough, we found out that John Williams was mining on Mission Creek, and he actually had dug a tunnel 60 feet into the bank of Mission Creek when he was mining. Well, guess what happened? It caved in. Guess where John Williams is buried? Somewhere along Mission Creek. But he was a pioneer. He was here in 1877. But isn't it amazing his name is commemorated on a stone in Wales? So that was quite a nice fluke. And Susan and I would get together and work on the book, and inevitably it'd be, okay, what did you find? Or we'd sit down and start working, and one of us would say, oh, by the way, just found another name. So we eventually had to say, no more. That's it. But there are still obviously lots of them out there. One of them that, interesting, it's not a burial in a way, but it's an important event. It's about Lakha Singh. Lakha Singh was a member of the Indo-Canadian community living in Kelowna area. So Lakha Singh. Now, we have to remember terms were different. They refer to Lakha Singh as a Hindu. He was a Sikh. Okay? And why did we put him in here? Well, listen to this. Hindu, Sikh cremation rites were conducted in the Scotty Creek district Sunday afternoon when the body of Lakha Singh was devoured by flames before close to 800 people who witnessed the ceremony. The well-known Ellison farmer, who was one of the wealthiest men in the Okanagan, died on Friday at the age of 72. Where's a picture of Lakha Singh? It's not a very good one, and it's the only one we could find. It's not very clear. And then it goes on to describe, his body was placed upon a wooden platform around which logs had been piled. After a brief service conducted at Day's funeral home in Kelowna, the long procession moved to the cremation site where hundreds more waited. The corpse was removed from the casket, anointed with oil by a priest, and then wrapped in a cotton material. A white turban was placed on his head. The body was then placed upon a wooden platform around which logs had been piled. Gasoline was sprinkled over the bier, and a torch engulfed it in flames. The fire was still burning 6 hours later. And that was it was a social event in respect to him. We've got people like John Spencer. This little guy's body was actually later removed from an isolated burial up on the family farm, and he's buried at the Kelowna Memorial Park Cemetery. We've got Alfred Taggart. I won't go into, I'm running out of time here, so this is a fella who went missing from Kelowna back in 1914, and some people happened upon some human remains up in Hydraulic Creek, up in the hills above Kelowna, and it turns out this Alfred Taggart had gone missing the previous few months, and they found his badly decomposed body. He'd actually been living up there by Hydraulic Creek, and it says Taggart, who was said to have come from Ontario about 10 years ago, was a trapper and laborer. For the past 3 years, he'd been working at local construction camps. During his stay, possibly earlier on the Kettle Valley Railway, during his stay at the Royal Hotel, he had been drinking heavily all the time. It's not possible this might have something to do with his death. His body, they found, was so badly rotted, they just buried him on site. So he's buried up there on Hydraulic Creek. We have the Campbell Browns. And there's some memorial plaques up above Oyama to the Campbell Browns. Very well-known family. I'm going to pass around this picture Susan copied, because I'm going to read to you. This is Louisa Campbell Brown. Again, courtesy of family members. Quite a remarkable lady. Campbell Browns were typical of that those pioneer families who came here for health reasons in a lot of cases. Didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of experience, were doomed, but they made it work. This is Mrs. Campbell Brown, this lady here. Isn't she a wonderful picture? And this is from her granddaughter. After Colin, that was her husband, died, Louisa, this lady here, returned to Amory, that was where they lived on Cal Lake, and developed as a summer camp, with small cottages on the beach and tea and fresh cream served at her house on summer afternoons. Very nice way to spend a day. This is the part that's quite amazing. In 1939, at the age of 79, she announced to her family that she had promised Colin, her husband, that if she ever got a chance, she would return to China, because the two of them had been in China. She had just received an unexpected sum of money. So keep in mind, this woman's 79 years old. She saw that money as a sign it was time to return to China. The Sino-Japanese War was in full swing, but there was no stopping her. This is the part that's amazing. This 79-year-old woman, 1939, think what the roads were like in BC in 1939. She was living up in the Okanagan. She wants to go to the coast. She wants to go to China from there. She got a ride on the back of a motorcycle at 79 to Vancouver. From there, she set off to visit their friends near Amoy in China and other friends in Hanoi. Her daily diary records dodging air raids and writing furious letters to the American government for supplying aluminum to the Japanese. Remember, war was on at that point. She stayed 6 weeks and came home thrilled with the people she'd seen and with a picture of the boys' school she'd started so many years ago. And that school in China was producing literally hundreds of students a year, professionals who were going to help the people in China. So there's her presiding at tea. Apparently, she was quite a ferocious woman. But then I think you have to be to ride a motorcycle at 79 to Vancouver and then going to China. So the Campbell Browns are covered in here. This was quite a fluke. We found this burial. Shizuku Chieba. She was a year old. She was a little girl of Japanese descent. She's buried somewhere up at Fintry. Where? We don't know. Dan Bruce, the archivist up there and curator, doesn't know. He thinks maybe he has an idea where. And her family was at the Chiebas. Here's Mr. and Mrs. Chieba. Again, family supplied us with that photograph. They were working up at Fintry. Her father, this fellow here, this little girl's father, worked for Dunwaters in the orchard. A lot of the early Japanese people worked in the orchards. He was fired. The reason, according to one of the local books, he was fired is because he discovered a bear on Dunwaters' property and shot the bear. And Dunwaters fired him. Now, lest you think that Dunwaters was a member of PETA or the SPCA, he didn't care about the bear. I would suspect that Dunwaters was a little upset because he didn't get to kill the bear. Dunwaters was a great hunter, and I think he was a little upset that, hey, that's sort of like the king's deer, Robin Hood. You don't mess with the king's deer. They belong to the king. So this little girl died. We started out with no information. We were able to find out about her family. These are her various siblings, which, as Susan mentioned, we included biographies in here. So she's included. The MacDougalls. Famous John MacDougall came here in 1861 with his wife Amelia Topa, and they had 9 sons. And then he had 3 daughters by another woman. And these are pictures you will not find anywhere, any archives. This guy I refer to as the cool dude. These pictures, the MacDougalls, these are phenomenal pictures. Thank you, Shirley Lewis, for loaning us those. MacDougalls are a huge name locally. Here's a bit of a document from, I'll just do this one more. an unpublished document written by one of the Brents, your family. Now we come to Johnny MacDougall. He was born in Manitoba, joined the Hudson's Bay Company as a canoeman and packer when he was 17 years of age. It was he who found the spoons way up in the north of the Arctic Circle belonging to the ill-fated Franklin expedition. When he was sent out as a member of an expedition, the Hudson's Bay Company sent out north to try to locate or find what was left of Franklin. Then, being sent to BC, he rode down the west side of Okanagan Lake with a pack track. And it goes on to, in this write-up, a bit of an argument he had with Judge Haynes about bringing material into the Okanagan. But it's great. It says, MacDougall, being an uneducated man, had a great memory, and many's a night I have listened. Remember, this is a Brent who was there. I have listened to him telling stories and yarns, always a different one. Randy, don't you want to be a fly on the wall in those nights? Or maybe you were, I don't know.
Somebody would probably swap me.
But to listen to them, he could tell so well, it seemed like life in his quaint English way of speaking. At every dance party in the valley, he was there. That's Johnny MacDougall. And no party was complete unless Johnny danced the famous Red River Jig in his moccasins. He never wore boots in his life. At the age of 70, he was still dancing it, his long hair hanging down to his shoulders, flying in the air, his feet hitting the board in perfect time, jumping knee-high off the floor. He was a sight to behold. I have seen tap dancers on the stage. No one came near him in accomplishment. So we've included lots on the MacDougalls. By the way, the MacDougalls are in a number of our books. And then the last one I'll mention is Reverend Stocks. These pictures, again, are ones, here's the grave site off the Bear Creek Road. There's a picture of their summer camp, their summer kitchen, in around 1910, 1912. And this is a write-up that one of the brothers did about coming to the Okanagan. His older brother had already come out around 1910, and this is Arthur Stocks. Stocks photography here at Penticton, that is the family. So there is a connection with the Stocks. And he's writing, this is in 1908. I sailed from Liverpool in the Empress of Ireland in December 1908. After a rough Atlantic passage, train across Canada, a slow mixed train from Sicamous to Okanagan Landing, where I arrived the day before Christmas. It's 1908. At the landing, I boarded the stern-wheeler Aberdeen for the voyage to Nain. Leaving Okanagan Landing, the stern-wheeled Aberdeen crisscrossed the lake to disembark a passenger, to leave packages, mail sacks, boxes, and large stone jugs at nearly every wharf. Not long before I learned more about the contents of these crocks. So this was the Okanagan. It was Christmas Eve, snowing and blowing, and the lake, the sky the color of lead. The land smothered in white. My thoughts strayed back to England. This poor young guy, out here, doesn't know anyone, waiting to meet his brother here. Christmas Eve, and he wants to go home. My thoughts strayed back to England, to the merriment, to the carol singers in my home village. And even a dram from the stone crock, which contained Hudson's Bay rum, did nothing to raise my spirits. I was homesick. It was still snowing, still blowing on Christmas Day. The lake was rough. The ice was piled in windrows along the beach. At mid-morning, my brother Alfred, with two companions, came kicking through the snow down from their hillside home. So he's going to meet his brother and take up farming there. And eventually, the rest of the family would come. And you're probably thinking, well, the farm was right by the lake. Wouldn't that have been nice? No. Hillside Farm, which was nearly 2,000 feet above the lake. So he was up on top of a mountain. My brother's arrival brightened things a bit. After a good bachelor Christmas dinner spiked with buttered rum, we started back through the snow. It's a 2-hour climb. And these are only a few of the stories in this book.
Markers cost a lot of money. And of course, some of the older ones are cement ones that are crumbling. And that's why it's really important to take photographs. Because from the time that the first books were done in the 80s and early 90s, we went back to the cemeteries to redo it. Some of those markers you couldn't read them. And there were no photographs. So we have to go by what other people said they saw. So it's a documentation of a type.